Well, it's a really interesting story about how I first started to think about managing my energy and not my time. It's a conversation I had with a friend-tor, I like to call him because he's a friend and a mentor. This amazing man called Kamal Sama, who's also the chairman of the Are You OK Day think tank. And he and I were having just a cup of tea one day, and I was actually at quite a low point in my career. I felt like I'd lost my mojo. And he said to me, have you thought about managing your energy and not your time? And it was a concept that just really sort of sat well with me. I think because of my background in fitness and working in the industry, and just this whole idea around energy being infinite versus time, which seemed to just to constrain you. And so what I did was just sort of took that little thought really and went out and started to do a lot more research into really what human energy systems were and how could I actually look at sort of really energizing myself again, because I felt, having lost my mojo, that I was just really depleted. And that sort of got me thinking about, you know, is there a better way to describe that feeling of just not really being yourself? And so now I've come to think about that as as an energy crisis, when you just don't have enough energy for yourself or the things or people that are important to you. And that's really how it all started. To incorporate this into your life, I've basically developed this really simple tool that helps me really reflect on the week that I've had, as well as plan the week that I'm going forward. And it's really just about managing what I'm calling your energy diary. So instead of thinking about your diary as time, you start to reframe it to think about energy. And that energy could be in terms of people, it could be in terms of the thing that you're working on, it could be about spending time with yourself and how you're fueling yourself even, because food in itself is a source of energy for us. So there's two things that I look at. If you imagine that you've got two axes on a graph, right? The one that's going straight up and down, right? At the top it's labeled energizing, at the bottom it's labeled depleting. Right? So that's really the measure of energy. On the bottom axes, you've got two labels. On the outside, you've got important, and on the inside, you've got unimportant, right? And that's sort of the start. And once you've got those two axes, right? So energizing, depleting, unimportant, important, you can actually start to categorize your week that you've had. And so if you think about putting your week, either whether it's past or coming, into 4 boxes. So it'll be either, so if you think about putting your week into 4 boxes, so then you've got options, right? You've got things which are depleting and unimportant. You've got things which are energizing and unimportant. You've got things which are depleting and important. And then you've got things which are energizing and important. Right? So once you've put things into those boxes, then you've got a way to start making decisions. And this is the way that I now manage my diary, right? So the first thing is I look at the things in my diary that are depleting and unimportant. Lose them, right? Say no. It's actually incredibly empowering to actually go, okay, well, that's actually bringing no value to my life at all, and it's sucking the life out of me, of anything. So that's the first stage. The second thing is, if it's energizing but it's unimportant, what I say is you just keep that in your back pocket, right? Because those are things that are fun, you know, that might not necessarily be, you know, about creating amazing value, but they could bring great joy to your life. If it's depleting and it's important, we need to reframe it. Right? And I'm going to come back to that one because that's probably the hardest part, right? And then if it's energizing and important, that's the stuff we want to increase. Now, what I can guarantee to you is that once you start looking at your diary like this, the stuff which is energizing and important over time just starts to fill up your diary, to the point where, like, I can honestly say that today pretty much my diary is just full of that. And it's not happened overnight. It's been a process of really being aware of those things, but absolutely guarantee that everyone can make this happen. So this doesn't mean that time necessarily is completely out. of your diary, right? It's just a different way of looking at that time that you spent, where you're making the space. And a good example of this is just some smart ways to manage your energy, right? So with my teams before, when I've been working, with my teams before, when I've been in a corporate setting or where I'm advising clients, what I've said to them is, if you've got something which is depleting but important, make sure you bookend it, right, in your diary with things which are energizing. Because if you have your whole day full of depleting stuff, that's when you want to go home and drink a whole bottle of wine, or maybe something worse than that, right? So we want to avoid that situation. Just so making smart choices about how you schedule your energy is the first part. What you do then is that, what you then start to find is that gradually over time, those energizing experiences start to build on each other. And often what you're achieving in the same amount of time is much more than you would have done before. The hardest thing to actually look at is the things which are depleting but important, right? And they can be a whole bunch of different reasons around that, right? Often they can be difficult relationships at work, could be difficult personal relationships, and they're things that we know that we need to actually work on. However, we also recognize that they're really challenging. Now, the key thing to think about here is that if you continue to think that that experience is going to be depleting, it's always going to be depleting, right? And the only thing that you can do is take responsibility and go, well, if I turn up differently, or if I reframe that or think about that experience differently, perhaps I can start to change it. And it's actually making that effort to change could actually end up turning that experience into be something maybe even energizing. An example of this, right, is really about thinking about the relationship that you might have, right? So it could be a work colleague and going, okay, well, why is that experience depleting? Because perhaps it's actually you that's making it depleting versus the other person. So there's some responsibility to take account of here. And the interesting to think about that is no one wants to be that energy vampire, is what we call them, right? So if you're coming into a situation thinking it's going to be depleting, it's going to be depleting. Whereas if you come into that situation and go, actually, what am I going to learn from this? Or actually, perhaps there's something going on for that other person, which means that they're not their best version of themselves when they turn up. It could be as simple things like, maybe they've got a young child and they didn't sleep very well, or maybe they're not into that topic as much. So in summary, the first thing to do is to use those 4 quadrants to really just take a reflective look back over your week that's been. Okay, where do things sit? Then you can use that to start making some decisions, right, for next week. Okay. First thing to do, get rid of as much as you can of the stuff which is depleting and unimportant, right? Because that itself is going to give you enough energy to deal with the harder stuff that we've talked about. So that's the second point, right, is make an action plan around that. Once you've built awareness, start to go, okay, these are the changes, these are the decisions that I'm going to make. The other thing I think for people is just to know that you have responsibility in those depleting situations. Right? It's not a one-way street. How you turn up is just as much to blame, I guess, in a way, as the other person. So really have a look at the way that you're turning up. Can you change something to actually turn that experience from being something which is depleting to be something that potentially could be energizing?